What's going on, everyone? We are live here in the Eagle newsroom in our fancy new set. I'm Travis Brown with the Eagle alongside Robert Cessna, and we have our special guest today, Ben Portnoy with the State, who covers South Carolina football. He's going to help us break down that game, the battle for the Bonham Trophy this weekend in Columbia. Ben, what's going on, man?
What's going on, guys? Appreciate you having me. This is a swanky new studio. I like it.
It's amazing what like a day's work of bye week can do for a room and for some cameras. So we're enjoying it here. So I know it's been a while. Do any of the players in South Carolina know what the Bonham Trophy is?
So I'm not going to lie, Travis. I think you wrote a story about like where the Bonham Trophy gets housed a couple of years ago. I had to go back and read that. I think last year when Shane Beamer actually made mention that there is a rivalry trophy, quote unquote, in this game. No, South Carolina. I can safely say that most of the South Carolina players did not know that there is a rivalry trophy involved in this game when they got asked about it last year, and they didn't exactly give themselves a reason to know it existed last year either. After that, 44-14 kind of beat down. So there's definitely a lacking awareness of Bonham Trophy lore here in Columbia.
Well, let's go into how we normally open these things, and that is what are some of the biggest storylines, things going on with the team, points of emphasis with the team heading into this game this weekend?
Yeah, I mean, South Carolina, I think, feels like it's in a really good place as a program right now. They're 4-2. They're coming off a bye week. They beat Kentucky 2 weeks ago in Lexington, obviously without Will Levis, but still a really good defense. And Chris Rodriguez was largely held in check. So I think that South Carolina's in a spot right now that this program, this team, Shane Beamer as a whole, I mean, they feel pretty good about where they're at. This is about as good as you could have hoped for the most part, with starting the season with games against Georgia, Arkansas, and Kentucky through those first 6. So I think that, when you look at where this program was at a year ago, kind of hoping and scratching and clawing its way to 6 wins, and frankly, I think on paper was more like a team that probably should have won closer to 3 games. I think folks are pretty excited. Things have been up and down, and there's been some ruts for sure. Got blown out against Georgia and sort of made the Arkansas game closer at the end than maybe it was. But South Carolina's shown some promise the last 3 weeks, I think, and folks are pretty excited about where things are at right now.
We can all laugh about the Bonham Trophy, and we will, and we'll continue to do that as long as A&M plays South Carolina. But no laughing matter, I guess, would be to South Carolina players is losing to A&M every year. I mean, it's been long enough now that what's the feeling? I mean, are they mad? Are they upset? They think it's an aberration, or what about they always? And most of these games are not close.
Yeah, it's become like the token talking point every year now when South Carolina plays A&M. Oh, do you guys feel any type of way about losing to A&M every time you played them? Or, what do you feel like about, is this the year that you beat A&M, right? All those things. And I think that Shane Beamer even joked about it today when he got asked about it. He was like, you asked me about this last year, and I think I said roughly the same things. Or are we just asking me again this year because we didn't win last year? And it was just one of those. So I think that, I think folks, what I will say is I think that, coming into this year, at least for me personally, like I circled this game. I thought it was going to be a more gettable game for South Carolina than a lot of people did. And I think that that's sort of only become more and more so. I think that this is a game that South Carolina feels like it can win. Zach Pickens, starting defensive tackle for South Carolina, even said today, roughly said, I'm paraphrasing, but basically said, this is probably the best chance we've had to actually beat an A&M team since I've been here. And he's been here for 4 years now. So this will be his 4th year. So I think that speaks a lot to where South Carolina feels about where they're at right now and what they could do on Saturday and sort of the product that we might see on the field on Saturday.
On the outside looking in, Spencer Rattler's numbers don't look that great to me. Has his impact been more than maybe his numbers show me?
Yeah, Spencer Rattler's been a really interesting case. And I've kind of said this for a couple of weeks now, is that his numbers don't really bear out how well he's played. I mean, he's, I think, 6th in the SEC in passing right now. He does have the 8 interceptions. About 4 of those probably aren't his fault and were completely on receivers. So I think that, the surface level of looking at his numbers, they don't look great, but I think that he's played a lot better than they might indicate. The other side of that too is he's looked really good the last 3 weeks, and he hasn't been asked to do a ton. I mean, there's been moments where, against Charlotte and South Carolina State, where South Carolina was mostly able to run the ball at will, and they leaned into that, and they didn't have to throw the ball 35 times. But again, last week, I mean, he wasn't great in the first half against Kentucky, looked a little erratic, had some happy feet, and then came back and came out 8 for 10 in the second half. I think racked up, I think, about 130 of his 178 yards in the second half. I mean, he looked really, really sharp and really, really good. So I think that there's been spurts of it. And again, I don't think the numbers necessarily say the whole story, but I think it's been a little bit of what we expect from Spencer Rattler, right? Like, there's some good, there's some bad. There's a few wow throws that remind you why he was talked about as a possible Heisman candidate, a year or 2 years ago. But I think right now, like, he has not been that kind of caliber player. But I do think he's played better than his numbers might indicate. And I do think that South Carolina is a lot more stable at the quarterback position right now than it was a year ago, for sure.
So year two of Shane Beamer in South Carolina, have you seen the steps, the progression to where the program wants to be under him? Have you seen his culture, his system start to take root a little bit more in year two, or is it still a little bit of a question of how long that'll take to integrate itself?
Yeah, I think guys have gotten pretty behind Shane Beamer. I mean, the buy-in is there, at least it seems like it, from my conversations at the surface level stuff that we hear, in press conferences and things like that. I mean, this is a program that I think feels pretty good about where it is right now. I think players have bought into what Shane Beamer's selling, and I think that there's definitely sort of the joke, I guess, is that Shane Beamer can be a little bit of a car salesman and kind of cheesy with the sunglasses and the backwards hats after the Kentucky game, and folks can get annoyed about that. But like, I think that's just kind of what South Carolina is, and it's fun and it's exciting. And I mean, look, like, let's be real, this is a program that has lost a lot more than it's won during its time in the SEC. And I think that if you're a program like that, like, you've got to do something different. I think Shane Beamer's done that. I think he's brought an excitement and energy and all those things, a positivity to the program that really was not there under Will Muschamp. And I think that that's something that's been a big change and a big culture shift. And I think you've seen that with the guys that have come in that have been recruited by Beamer. You've seen it from the guys that are here that have bought into what he's selling. And I think that, certainly South Carolina, again, like, feels like it's in a position to capitalize on that again this year. I mean, with A&M this week, they play Missouri and Vanderbilt the next 2 weeks after that, and then a trip to Florida. So, like, there's not really a game in the next month that South Carolina doesn't feel like it can win. And sitting at 4-2, I'm not saying they're going to go win all 4 of those games, but I think they feel pretty good about getting back to bowl eligibility and having a chance to get to 6, 7, 8 wins and somewhere in that range.
What about, A&M struggles are well documented in offense. They're kind of surprised that they're not better than what they are. Struggles the offensive line, quarterback. When I look at South Carolina's stats, man, great stats against passing, not so great against rushing. How do you look at that matchup? Do you feel that that's a big edge for South Carolina going into this game, or how do you feel about that?
Yeah, it's definitely been a problem. I think that under Shane Beamer, South Carolina hasn't really been great against stopping the run. I think some of that the first few weeks were some injuries. I mean, South Carolina lost its starting defensive end in Jordan Strawn and starting middle linebacker in Mo Cabo in week 2. And I think some of that was just adjusting. I mean, that was in the middle of a game against Arkansas, which can run the ball with the best of them. And I think that was, you saw a couple of weeks of South Carolina trying to figure out how to mitigate those losses. And I think that over time, it's gotten better. I mean, I think that it's hard to read too far into games against Charlotte and South Carolina State, but South Carolina's been better against the run the last few weeks. And last week, even against Chris Rodriguez, who went off for, a gajillion yards against Mississippi State this past week, he was held to about, 126 yards on 22 carries against South Carolina. And I mean, he only had 4 carries that went for 10 or more yards, and I don't think he had a single carry that went for 20 or more. He may have had 1 carry that was a 20-yard carry, but on those other 18 carries, he was only averaging about 3.5 yards a touch. And I think that was marked improvement from where South Carolina was a couple of weeks before that. And I think that whether that's a flash in the pan or something that speaks to what we're going to see the rest of the season, we'll see. And I think that Texas A&M is a really good test of that with what they tried out there at running back. And I think that, South Carolina feels pretty good about the way it game planned for Kentucky. And I think you're probably going to see a pretty similar thing against A&M this week.
What about South Carolina? Is one of those teams that hit the transfer portal really hard, I thought. And, of course, Spencer Rattler was the key. How those other transfers panned out? Do you think that big plus for South Carolina going to the transfer portal or not?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think that Juice Wells, Antoine Wells on the edge, a receiver, has been really, really good this year. I mean, he's probably been their best receiver, throughout the season. He's got some serious big play potential. He's fast as heck. He's a guy that'll beat you to the edge and just outrun you and all of those things. So I think that he's the guy that came from James Madison and rewrote the record books there. Was maybe a little bit of an under the radar guy as far as transfer portal guys go. When you bring in a guy like Spencer Rattler, but he's been really, really good. Austin Stogner, who played at Oklahoma with Spencer, has been pretty good in spurts. He's had his moments. He caught his first touchdown pass at South Carolina a couple of weeks ago. He's looked better as they've gotten him more involved. And I think that's been a positive. And then Devontae Reed at safety has been a really big boost for them. I mean, this is a team that lost an All-American safety in Jalen Foster from last year, a guy who kind of came out of nowhere, turned into an All-American, and suddenly they needed to replace. And Devontae Reed came over from Central Michigan, where he was an All-MAC guy there and did some really nice things. And he's been pretty good since he's gotten to South Carolina. Now, there's some guys that haven't quite flashed, whether because of injury or other guy being buried on the depth chart or whatever it might be. But for the most part, I feel like South Carolina has gotten what it wanted out of its transfers, and it's had a pretty high hit rate as far as the guys that it's brought in.
Well, let's close out with this. What are the keys to the game for South Carolina to be successful? What do they need to do in order to get on top of the Aggies?
Yeah, I think to me, South Carolina's got to be able to run the football. I mean, I don't think that, when South Carolina has been at its best this year, it's in games that it's been able to run the football. The Kentucky game, for example, it was able to run the football. It ran for 1,000,000 yards against Charlotte and South Carolina State for the most part. I mean, you kind of expect those things, but the games that South Carolina played really well and looked crisp offensively, it was able to get a push and get push guys off the line of scrimmage. And I think that this offensive line was a group that was maligned a lot over the offseason, a lot through last year, and frankly, deservedly so through the first 3 games of this season. And they've been really good the last 3 weeks. They've been really sound. They've been really solid. And I think that if they can get a push and get Marshawn Lloyd going downhill, I mean, I really do think he's one of the better backs in this conference right now. And he's, I think, tied for second in the conference in rushing touchdowns right now. He might be top 5 in the conference in total touchdowns on the year. So he's a guy that they need to get going and keep going. Outside of that, I think the defense, again, has to be able to stop the run. I mean, with what Devin Achane can do, South Carolina's got to be able to slow that down. But if they keep him, 120, like if he ends up with 120 yards, I think South Carolina can win this football game. Like if you make Haynes King drop back there and throw the ball 30 times, South Carolina feels pretty good about their chances because this is a secondary that I think they can create some takeaways and cause some turnovers and do some things to make things uncomfortable. And it's a group, too, frankly, that has done a pretty good job getting after the passer. I mean, Kentucky's offensive line has been really bad this year, but South Carolina had 6 sacks 2 weeks ago against the Wildcats in Lexington. So this is a group that's been more disruptive than it might show on paper. They don't necessarily have the sack numbers to back it up, but they've been up there and have gotten into quarterback space. So I think that if they can create a world where, Achane runs for 120 yards or 125 yards and Haynes King has to throw the ball 25, 28 times, like that's a pretty good recipe for success. And I think if you double that with the running game, if South Carolina runs for about 150 yards, I think they'll feel pretty good about where they're at offensively, and that you expect that Spencer Rattler will make a few plays here and there as well.
Well, Ben, I think that's all we got for you today. Why don't you let the people know where they can read your stuff and find you on social media?
Yeah, you can follow me at bportnoy15 on Twitter, and then you can read my stuff on thestate.com. So any of those places is a good spot to find it.
Wonderful. Well, Ben, thanks so much. We'll see you out there in Columbia, and thanks everyone for watching this breakdown.